You think Scandinavia is one unified region? Blonde people, IKEA furniture, a place where everyone looks basically the same. What if I told you that a genetic boundary runs straight through the middle of Scandinavia, and that boundary has been there for 10,000 years? What if the Vikings you picture in your head, the tall Nordic warriors, only represent half the story? And what if modern Swedes living 400 kilometers apart are more genetically different from each other than Germans are from Italians? The truth about Scandinavia is that it's not one place. It never was. And by the end of this video, everything you thought you knew about Nordic Unity will be completely shattered. Let's dig in. From the Ice Age survivors who took two completely different routes to reach the frozen north, to the genetic codes that split modern Scandinavians into distinct populations, to the indigenous people whose ancestry connects them not to Europe but to Siberia, we're about to uncover the real story of Scandinavia. This isn't about blonde hair and blue eyes. This is about ancient migrations, isolated populations, and a genetic divide so profound that is still visible in the DNA of every person living there today. The split between southern and northern Scandinavia, it's hiding in plain sight, waiting to reveal a story that spans from the melting glaciers of the Ice Age to the genetic testing labs of the 21st century. These tall, pale, supposedly homogeneous people, where did they actually come from? And more importantly, why are they so different from each other? Before we can understand the divide, we need to understand what happened 20,000 years ago. Picture this. The entire Scandinavian peninsula is buried under ice sheets 2 kilometers thick. Not a single human being lives there. Not a single tree grows. Just ice, stretching from the Arctic to what is now Denmark. This is the last glacial maximum, the peak of the Ice Age, and Scandinavia doesn't exist as a habitable place. The people who would become Scandinavians, they're scattered across southern Europe, huddled in refuges in Spain, Italy, the Balkans, waiting for the ice to retreat. But here's what's fascinating. When the ice finally started melting around 15,000 years ago, people didn't just wait for a clear path, they followed the retreating glaciers from two completely different directions. Southern Scandinavia was repopulated by people moving north through what is now Germany and Denmark. These were Western European hunter-gatherers, descendants of populations that had survived the Ice Age in Franco-Iberian refugees. They brought Western European genetics, Western European culture, and they claimed the southern coasts. But northern Scandinavia, that was settled from the east. People moved west from Russia, following the Norwegian and Finnish coasts. These were Eastern European hunter-gatherers with genetic ties to populations in the Urals and beyond. They brought something completely different, Uralic ancestry, a genetic signature that doesn't exist in Western Europe at all. For thousands of years, these two populations expanded toward each other, and somewhere in the middle of modern Sweden, they met. And here's the thing that should blow your mind. They didn't mix. Not really. Not enough to erase the boundary. That invisible line, drawn by Ice Age migrations 10,000 years ago, is still there. You can see it in DNA samples taken from Swedes today. Southern Swedes cluster genetically with Danes, Germans, and Dutch. Northern Swedes cluster with Finns, Sami, and populations from northwestern Russia. The genetic distance between a person from Malmö in southern Sweden and a person from Kiruna in northern Sweden is greater than the genetic distance between that Malmö resident and someone from Berlin. Think about that. Scandinavia isn't genetically unified. It never was. It's two worlds separated by an ancient migration boundary that has persisted for 10 millennia. Now, if you want proof of this split, just look at the genetic markers. Scientists have mapped Scandinavian DNA with precision that would have been impossible just a decade ago. A landmark study analyzed Y chromosome haplogroups across the entire region, and the results are striking. Southern Scandinavia is dominated by haplogroup R1b. This is the genetic signature of Western European hunter-gatherers and later, Bronze Age steppe pastoralists who swept into Europe 5,000 years ago. R1b peaks in Ireland, Britain, France, and Iberia. In southern Scandinavia, it reaches frequencies of 40 to 50%. This is the Viking DNA everyone pictures. The raiders who crossed the North Sea, the seafarers who colonized Iceland and Greenland. But in northern Scandinavia, R1b drops off dramatically. Instead, you find two completely different markers. Haplogroup I1, which represents ancient Scandinavian hunter-gatherers who lived there before the Bronze Age migrations, and haplogroup N1c, which is the smoking gun. N1c is not a European marker, it's Uralic. It originated in Siberia and spread west with migrations from the Ural Mountains. In Finland, N1c reaches frequencies of 60%. In northern Sweden and Norway, it reaches 20 to 30%. In southern Scandinavia, it's almost non-existent. This isn't a gradual climb, it's a genetic cliff. And it corresponds perfectly to that 10,000-year-old migration boundary. But here's where it gets even more interesting. When scientists looked at autosomal DNA, the full genome, rather than just paternal lineages, they found the same pattern. Northern Scandinavians show elevated levels of what geneticists call Siberian or East Eurasian ancestry. This is genetic material that doesn't come from Europe at all. It comes from populations that lived east of the Ural Mountains, the same populations that gave rise to the Sami people. The Sami, if you don't know, are the indigenous people of northern Scandinavia. They've lived in Lapland for thousands of years, herding reindeer, speaking a Uralic language completely unrelated to Swedish or Norwegian. For a long time, people assumed the Sami were just another Scandinavian population. They're not. Genetically, the Sami are a distinct group. They carry 40 to 50% N1c haplogroup ancestry. They show elevated levels of East Eurasian admixture. They cluster genetically with Finns and populations from northwestern Russia, not with Swedes or Norwegians. The Sami are the living representatives of that eastern migration route, the people who came from Russia and settled the Arctic coast while southern Scandinavians were still moving up through Denmark. And here's what makes this revolutionary. The genetic boundary between southern and northern Scandinavia isn't just ancient history. It's a boundary that has been maintained for 10,000 years, even after the Bronze Age, even after the Viking Age, even after centuries of Swedish state expansion into the north. The genetic divide persists. Why? Because northern Scandinavia was harsh. It was remote. It was Arctic tundra and boreal forest. The populations that lived there maintained their hunter-gatherer lifestyle long after southern Scandinavia adopted farming. They stayed isolated, not by choice, but by geography. The reindeer herders of the north and the farmers of the south lived in completely different worlds. They spoke different languages, they had different survival strategies, and they didn't intermarry enough to erase the genetic boundary that separated them. Which brings us to the part of Scandinavian history nobody talks about, the linguistic divide. Because this isn't just about DNA, it's about language too. Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish are North Germanic languages. They evolved from Old Norse, the language of the Vikings. They're related to German, English, and Dutch. They're Indo-European languages, part of a family that stretches from Ireland to India. But Sami and Finnish, they're not Germanic. They're not Indo-European. They're Uralic languages, part of a completely different language family that includes Estonian, Hungarian, and languages spoken in Siberia and the Ural Mountains. The fact that two completely unrelated language families exist side by side in Scandinavia is not a coincidence. It's a direct reflection of that 10,000-year-old genetic split. The people who came from the west brought Indo-European languages. The people who came from the east brought Uralic languages, and when they met in the middle, they created a linguistic boundary that mirrors the genetic one. To this day, you can draw a line through central Scandinavia where Indo-European languages give way to Uralic ones. It's the same line where R1b haplogroups give way to N1c. It's the same line where Western European ancestry gives way to Siberian admixture. It's the same line drawn by Ice Age migrations 10,000 years ago. Scandinavia isn't linguistically unified any more than it's genetically unified. Now here's where the story gets uncomfortable, because the Swedish and Norwegian states didn't respect this boundary. For centuries, they expanded into Sami territories, imposing their language, their religion, their culture. Sami children were forced into boarding schools where speaking Sami was forbidden. Reindeer herding lands were seized for farming and mining. The genetic and linguistic boundary that had existed for 10 millennia was treated as something that needed to be erased. And it almost was. Today, only about 20,000 people speak Sami languages. The rest have been assimilated into Swedish and Norwegian culture. But here's the thing. The genetics remain. You can suppress a language. You can suppress a culture. But you can't suppress DNA. The northern Scandinavians who identify as Swedish or Norwegian today still carry the genetic signatures of that eastern migration. They still cluster genetically with the Sami, even if they don't identify as Sami. The boundary is still there, invisible but undeniable. So what does this mean for modern Scandinavia? It means that the idea of a unified Nordic identity is a political construct, not a genetic reality. It means that when someone talks about Viking DNA or Nordic ancestry, they're only talking about half of Scandinavia. It means that the Sami people aren't a footnote in Scandinavian history. They're one of the two founding populations with roots just as deep as anyone else. And it means that the genetic diversity of Scandinavia is far greater than most people realize. This isn't a homogeneous region. It's a crossroads where Western European and Eastern European populations met and created two distinct genetic zones that have persisted for 10,000 years. But here's what really blows my mind. This pattern isn't unique to Scandinavia. It's happening all over the world. Genetic studies are revealing hidden boundaries, ancient migrations, populations that look unified on the surface but are deeply divided beneath. The Scandinavian split is just one example of how geography, migration, and isolation can create genetic boundaries that last for millennia. Speaking of unexpected connections across vast distances, here's another piece of surprising information. If someone asked you what the Basque people of Spain, the Sami of Scandinavia, and the Ainu of Japan have in common, you'd probably be puzzled. These populations are separated by thousands of kilometers and live on different continents. Here's the answer. They're all genetic isolates, populations that maintained distinct ancestries while everyone around them mixed. The Basques carry pre-Indo-European genetic signatures that disappeared everywhere else in Western Europe. The Sami carry Uralic ancestry that connects them to Siberia, not Europe. The Ainu carry Jomon ancestry, linking them to ancient populations that lived in Japan before rice farming arrived. Why am I telling you this? Because it demonstrates how deeply interconnected human history is, but also how isolated populations can survive within larger regions. How indigenous groups preserve genetic and cultural identities even when surrounded by dominant populations. How the boundaries we think of as modern, national borders, cultural divides, are often just modern labels for ancient realities. The Scandinavian genetic divide isn't unique. It's just particularly well preserved. So here's where we land. What is the truth about Southern versus Northern Scandinavia? They're not one people. They're two populations with completely different origins who met in the middle of a frozen peninsula 10,000 years ago and never fully merged. Southern Scandinavians are the descendants of Western European hunter-gatherers and Bronze Age steppe pastoralists. They're the Vikings of legend, the seafarers, the raiders, the people who colonized Iceland and Greenland. Northern Scandinavians are the descendants of Eastern European hunter-gatherers and Uralic migrations from Russia. They're the reindeer herders, the Arctic survivors, the people who learned to live in tundra and forest. Both groups thrived in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Both developed sophisticated survival strategies. Both contributed to what we now call Scandinavian culture, but they are not the same. And pretending they are erases the complexity of 10,000 years of human history. The genetic boundary that runs through Scandinavia is a reminder that human populations are never simple. They're always a product of migration, isolation, adaptation, and mixing. The people who tell you otherwise, who claim Scandinavia is one unified Nordic race, are either ignorant or lying. The truth is messy. The truth is that a person from southern Sweden has more in common genetically with a German than with a person from northern Sweden. The truth is that the Sami are just as indigenous to Scandinavia as anyone else. And the truth is that this divide, drawn by Ice Age migrations 10,000 years ago, is still shaping the genetics, the languages, and the cultures of Scandinavia today. So what surprised you most about this 10,000-year genetic divide? Was it the two separate migration routes after the Ice Age? The fact that northern and southern Scandinavians are more different from each other than Italians and Germans? The Uralic ancestry connecting northern Scandinavia to Siberia? Or maybe the linguistic boundary that mirrors the genetic one? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know what hit you hardest. And if you're hungry for more stories that reveal the hidden complexity of human origins, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started, because history isn't what they taught you in school. It's stranger, messier, and so much more interesting than the myths.